We're on Facebook and Twitter with our post show, continuing our discussion, protest, police, and hope for the future. I want to ask all of you about the history that's come to the fore. It's an amazing amount of African-American history all at once. So we're hearing about Tulsa, and then now we're hearing about Juneteenth. And this is brand new information, for some black people, but for a lot of white people. And it's been interesting that in the context of what's happening in the streets and what happened to George Floyd, they're just trying to process what this all means. But I think it's really important that this history has come forward, that it somehow anchors this, if it's a movement, I'm not calling it that yet, or whatever this reaction is, in a way that may give it some stability that we haven't seen before, because people are really going back to try to figure out, oh, wow, I actually did not know this. Rahsaan, you alluded to that, what that history has meant in the past. Talk about it, if you would.
I think there's this important opportunity to really highlight who we are as a country. That's why I think the 1619 Project was so important, because it changes the narrative about our national identity, right? You know, for many people, they grew up learning about slavery as some distant incident that happened. But thanks to Abraham Lincoln, you know, slavery ended. But there was never any conversation about the Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction era and the rise of black codes, or the rise of convict leasing, or state-sanctioned, you know, segregation through Jim Crow, or the fact that Jim had an uncle named Sam, and the role that the federal government played in denying black people's rights through block busting and redlining, or the Federal Social Security Administration Act that denied black people access, or the Federal Highway Administration Act that just raised entire black communities, from the war on poverty to the war on crime to the war on drugs and the building out of mass incarceration. There's this uninterrupted thread that runs from this nation's history, from slavery up through now, and people are beginning to grapple and reckon with it, that the badges and incidents of slavery have never really departed. And the more that there's an understanding of that, I think the better able we will be to address some of those injustices. You talk about Tulsa and the Tulsa massacre, like 99 years ago last month. It was horrific. And you think about the amount of wealth that black people had acquired in the state of Oklahoma. My wife is from Oklahoma, and she's finding out all this history about these 50 all-black towns in Oklahoma that people have lost property, wealth, everything. And so, you know, there's a bill in Congress, H.R. 40, to have a reparations commission to study what it is we are owed. And so that's why this history is so important.
Cecil, you were nodding your head.
Yeah. The thing about that, I try to put it in a slightly different context, so a little wider lens. I think what we're seeing here is this sort of contention, this dealing with, for white America, this struggle between this really egalitarian self-image of like land of the free, home of the brave, and contending with a really significant history of repression and violence. And I think as more and more people begin to understand, you know, what is, the Tulsa massacre in relation to these ideals that we've held, I think we might have a chance for white America in particular to really come to grasp what it is that they need to do going forward. I think for many Black Americans and many other people of color, that gulf between the self-image and this really violent history is very clear.
Kenneth Shropshire, I thought that the taking down of the Confederate flag at NASCAR, really based on the urging of Bubba Brown, I think is his name, was Bubba Willis. Was fairly amazing. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, where the flag is everywhere, on everything. So that to me was that from a corporate stand. I mean, I know there's some other agenda. There has to be. But in that moment, in this moment, that feels very powerful. How did you see it?
No, I have to admit, and the skeptic that I am, the symbolism of that was far beyond anything I anticipated. And also, Bubba Wallace, a Black driver at NASCAR. Frankly, I'm a big sports guy. It wasn't that well versed that he existed.
Yeah.
So it was very positive for him to step up in that moment. I think what that is a reflection, as you said initially, of white people just learning that this is real, that this is, the old, just because I don't feel your pain doesn't mean you don't hurt. I mean, the idea that they finally understood in a way, okay, we need to do that. I continue to be fascinated when I speak to groups, and I've spoken to a lot of sports organizations. The end result, and this rarely happens when I speak otherwise, is what else can I read? I want to know more about this. So the idea that, for us, we have almost universally no new fear. I mean, we knew about this already. This is all. So we're just digesting this as, okay, here's another one, another version. But whatever the reason is, this George Floyd moment was so impactful. The vacuum of sports, the vividness of it, all those pieces have made this real for some reason, and it's registered with so many people. And they say, maybe I should have, let me see what else I didn't pay attention to. So the idea of, reading lists and all these kinds of things to these white communities is just a whole new moment. And that's why I say this whole, Juneteenth thing. I mean, it's been there. I don't know, and it's not, and it has a position in our community, but, the national holiday thing and all that becomes a whole different kind of, we got some other stuff to do.
Yeah. Well, here in Massachusetts, Governor Deval Patrick actually signed a proclamation about Juneteenth in 2007, I believe, and made Massachusetts the 25th state. But what's interesting now in this moment is there are a lot of companies offering, suggesting it should be a paid holiday, and many of them offering employees time off in celebration of it because, as you said, as many of you said, they just learned about it. A slightly different question to you, Khalil, because I'm interested that the Confederate statues have come back into play in this moment as well. There's a lot going on, but the people attacking the monuments, once again, bringing up that it's not heritage, that this is a history and a very traumatic history, and a connected one to that was injurious to black people. But more people are responding to it. Now, whether or not you're supposed to be tearing down the statues is one thing, but there is quite a bit of interest in getting those statues down and in some instances changing the names of the monuments. How do you read that?
Well, again, I read it as the continuation of the work that people like Bree Newsom began when she pulled down the Confederate flag as an act of civil disobedience in Columbia, South Carolina, in the aftermath of the murder of 9 parishioners at Emmanuel AME. So, for example, a black woman literally protested Silent Sam on the campus of the University of North Carolina for an entire year. Eventually, Silent Sam came down. So we have to remember that black women and black people have been on the front line of pushing for these changes. The tipping point is really how much more support they have gotten from elected officials as well as white Americans around these issues. That's what's changed in this moment. And the truth is, when you're 13% of the population, while black folks loom large in every aspect of American history and are present, and will certainly have outdone white folks in terms of their contributions to American society, most of all change has always happened when white people decided to behave differently. I want to add one more key point about history and the taking up of history and the reading of history in this moment. One of the things that I would argue may not be as obvious is that the average white American is completely miseducated about American history. And the most generous reading of this moment, in light of how people are responding to the ongoing stories from Arbery to Breonna Taylor to Floyd to the pandemic, et cetera, is like finally saying, oh, wait a minute, I have been miseducated. Like, I don't know these things, not because I myself just have been a quote unquote denier, but in fact, my K through 12 education didn't teach this to me. I went to college. I went to an elite school, like my Harvard students, and they're like, what the heck? Nobody ever taught this to me. And that is a political problem because in 50 states with 50 education systems, there's been a concerted effort to deny the truth of our American past.
I would like to know how each of you have been approached in this moment. I know, Rahsaan, you mentioned lots of folks asking about stuff to read. I know, Cecil, everybody's asking, how do you feel? But I'm interested in what struck you about, in the middle of all of this, of how people are approaching you and they're trying to understand the moment. Cecil, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's been a mixed bag. In some regards, like many people, particularly my white friends, have been reaching out, wanting to know like how I'm doing, not necessarily burdening me with their own feelings of guilt or like Khalil was saying, miseducation, but really wanting to know like that I'm okay and wanting to support that. And then on the other side, there might be some people that I haven't talked to in years that will send a text like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And that can be a very different experience. Like, and this is something I hear a lot clinically with many of the, young professionals I see and kids, where there's this experience of, okay, this has been going on for so long, and this is it's not simply an existential threat, but a real physical threat to like the health and well-being and the life of many people. How is it that that you're just finding out about this now? It can feel really dismissive and really make like light of problems that are really important in American history. So there's a wide range in that regard. And I certainly have been approached a lot by companies, institutions, groups to talk more about these things when it really should come from an institution in ways that they can like demonstrably engage in.
Kenneth Shropshire?
Black Friends, I hate to divide the world like this, but Black Friends has been an extension of the pandemic. It just became another layer within it. And the supportive kind of structure that we found a way to put in place based on the pandemic, introduction to technology to, 70-something Black folks on Zoom. So all those things, this just got rolled into it. For, white friends and acquaintances, I got an abundance of emails and calls with that language, as Dr. Webster said, of, are you okay? How are you feeling? And that's when I did initiate the kind of the thought within myself, and I found out it probably wasn't the right thing to express. Of, I have no new fear. Kind of this is, as everybody's been saying, well, this is not my problem. This is not my moment. This is your moment. Mm-hmm. How do you feel? And trying to engage in a forward-moving conversation, as opposed to a little bit of anger on my part. I'm also saying, well, I told you so. Didn't you see Rodney King? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is not something new. But I'm glad you've awakened to the extent that you want to have this kind of conversation with me. And I tell you, with enterprises, with my former academic institution, with all kinds of places I've been. Can you come talk with us? I mean, so a lot of that kind of thing too. I mean, this is the if you are a hustler, a capitalist, kind of a race trader, mm-hmm. this is just and this is we got to be really careful too about this unconscious bias training and all these remedies that people are going to monetize rather than move notions forward that we need to move forward.
Rahsaan.
Yeah, I think I'm no different with folks, white friends and acquaintances, giving thoughts of encouragement or asking how I'm handling all this. I think some of the things that have struck me as interesting, though, are the people who have invited me to come and speak to their groups. I've had a relationship with some of the players on the New England Patriots, but I was recently invited to speak to the Patriots by Coach Belichick, which, for New England sports fans who understand who he is and even some of his expressions of political allegiance, that's pretty unique.
Yeah, I'm grabbing my heart. Go ahead. Because that is unique. Yeah.
Right. So, and he and Robert Kraft were both on this virtual team meeting, and I didn't pull any punches talking about the history of racism, white supremacy in this country, and even defunding the police. So that says that there is a heightened level, or at least a heightened receptivity to engaging in these conversations. And because of that, like, business owners are now reaching out saying, can you talk to us? And so, to Professor Shropshire's point, Like, we got to avoid this, kind of pimping this moment of the people who will seek to exploit this. Folks are asking, can you come and do an equity audit of our, organization? And so I think there's an opportunity, again, to get to that deep structural change. But there are a lot of people who are just going to kind of backfill some of this stuff and do more harm than good.
Khalil, this is your day job, so how do you see it differently in this time than what might have been happening just in your regular way of your teaching, because this is what you concentrate on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest change is that it's an intensification of what I already do on a scale that I've never experienced before. I mean, the last 3 weeks have been completely insane. That being said, I think that one of the things that I have tried to do is to focus on being a resource to movement people who need the facts of history or other things that I'm involved in terms of reform work because of various organizations that I am on the boards of. Movement people are prepared to push and do the work in the streets, but they also need support. Every social justice movement across time started with a study group, had teach-ins. And so I'm seeing that kind of work pick up in my space, which is different than the usual engaging students or organizations that just want some kind of a history lesson. The one thing I just want to add, though, this is really important. White Americans are amongst the wealthiest and most educated population in the world. They know how to get things done that they want to get done. And so in light of what Rahsaan has talked about and Ken has described with regard to this moment of like equity advice and auditing, the burden needs to be on white people to read, to understand, and to act. And so outsourcing all that labor, that intellectual labor, that communicative labor, I'm not saying it's not part of an effort, but these folks are very proud of all the things they've done in the world. They are perfectly capable of figuring out how to dismantle systemic racism if that's what they want to do.
All right, last question to each of you. We all meet together here this time next year. What's happening? Kenneth?
Why I got to start on that one? I tell you a major element, the pandemic. I mean, I think a lot of what progress we make is going to be based on how long we are in, different versions of quarantine. And I think in a kind of a strange kind of shift that the longer we're in quarantine, it's possible the more progress we will make because there's so much more attention being paid to issues. And now this is the issue than there ever has been before. As I said, we're trying to figure out that confluence of events with George Floyd, the pandemic, and all this activity. Will we make substantial progress? I think that, the legislation that passes in all these various bodies is really going to be our indicator of progress, because we're not going to see, hearts and minds, automatic change there. But is the framework changed, and corporate frameworks too, in terms of hiring and new structures within that? So I'm not optimistic that a year is long enough for substantial change, but I think we can see if we're headed in the right direction.
Rahsaan?
Unfortunately, I foresee economic crisis because of this pandemic, particularly in our communities. I foresee the rise of white militarism and more hate crimes. And I see unfunded good intentions in the legislature undercutting the principles behind the things that were suggested. So to the extent that people are talking about shifting funding away from police budgets to invest in community, we might get the shift, but it's either going to be reinvested in the carceral state or it's not going to go to the community services, therefore justifying not having shifted it away in the first place.
Cecil?
Yeah, I'm going to offer a little hopefulness in the sense of coronavirus has really demonstrated that we are able to make really quick, substantive change when faced with a major problem. It does exist in us. We are capable of it. Many of the hospital systems that I've been involved with quickly changed how we interacted with patients, had new procedures in place, new policies. We have a template for how to address structural racism, and we know that we can do it. There are places, obviously, in America that have done coronavirus a lot better than others. And ironically, coronavirus has provided us no place to hide from these really significant challenges that we have with regard to structural racism. So my hope is if we are prudent, we will utilize some of the same templates that we've had with addressing this global, difficult problem for one of America. And I think that we're quite capable of doing so. Hopefully, people will be able to stomach the change.
Last word, Khalil.
Well, look, we haven't had a single conversation here about the 2020 election. So everything is going to shift one way or the other. Either we'll be talking about the fact that Trump has a second term and all bets will be off for the future of the nation with regard to both the midterms that will be a year away at that point, as well as another presidential run. If Biden wins, then we'll be talking about the tricky balancing act between a Democratic Party that has clearly favored a moderate candidate, a level of support within the Black community from James Clyburn and others who have, I will say, for the Congressional Black Caucus, has not been leading this effort for racial justice reform and accountability. They certainly have a bill, but that's a bill in response to protests. It wasn't a bill that they were raring to go with. So it's going to be fascinating to see in Washington in terms of the national conversation if there's a Biden administration about what the future of America looks like. And, I'll be here to just eat popcorn and tell you what I've observed over the last few months.
Well, I thank you all for your wisdom and insight. Thanks so much for joining me.
Great. Thanks for having us.